I'm Sabuj. I'm from India, and I'm a visiting fellow at University of Sheffield. And I already finished my PhD 2 years back, but I like research, so I'm continuing my study till now, and hopefully for quite some time in future. So today I'm going to talk about mountains because I work in mountains, and they are not only a very beautiful place to live, but they are also home for magnificent different kind of flora and fauna. And when you go to a mountain and you started walking from the lower elevation or altitude towards little bit higher, there are several things which got changed along your movement. That can be different atmospheric pressures, solar radiation, temperature, precipitation, as well as different seasons. And all this combined to create a topography diversity. That means all the places in across mountain elevation gradient are very different from each other, and that creates unique habitat for several animal and plants. That's why mountains are such a big highly biodiverse system. And in mountains I mainly study this small cute animal called pika, Pika. There are several species you can find around the world, but I study only one species called Royalist pika in Himalaya, and they are relative of rabbits and hares. And because this animal is so cute, they inspire people to make Pokemon and Pikachu cartoons in Japan. And here, before moving further, we should be able to see a video about American pikas. So they are making calls. So pikas can make burrows in some cases in Tibetan plateaus and Ataram areas. Also, they always use rock crevices as their home, because certain pika species like Himalayan pika species or pika which lives in American Rocky Mountains can't make burrows, so they use these rock crevices as their home. Why they are important? Why people should care about them? Because they are very important prey species for several animals and birds, and because they are rabbits, that's why they don't get these winter hibernation or winter sleep during around probably November till next February, because they're active. So they are the only prey for this or food for these particular animals and birds which feed on other animals. They make burrows, so their activity on soils influence several soil geochemical cycles. For example, you might have known or have heard of nitrogen cycles as well as phosphorus cycles. So their burrowing activity influence those cycles. And they are herbivores, that means they eat plants, and this grazing activity of eating plants influence alpine plant communities. But then there's a big problem with pikas, because due to change in global temperature, they get heat stress. That means these animals are adapted to high alpine regions, which is very cold. So now their entire body is very thick, fur coated. When the moment due to high temperature during the day, they get heat stress. That means they can't have the sweating to get rid of the heat, and they die. Problem during winter is a little different. They like snow because snow acts as a blanket for them, and their habitat or their burrows become very warm, so they can live there quite nicely. But due to climate change, the snow thickness are very less now, so that expose this animal for the cold stress. And finally, they are herbivores. They eat different kind of foods, but due to change in precipitation and temperature, their favorable food resources are going to be changed or already changes certain areas. That means they are not getting proper nutrition, and these three things combine together to make them vulnerable towards climate change. So I'm studying them in Himalaya, where you can see the red arrow. It's called Uttarakhand. This area is quite famous for its scenic beauty. So this is a Hindu temple for god Shiva. This is the highest a Shiva temple in India, and these all other photographs depicts different seasons, certain vulture which is very endemic to that particular region of Himalaya, and flowers. When I worked there, so I also got to see these wonderful snow-capped mountains. And when I'm saying mountain, that means these mountains are more than 7,000 meters in height and always under snow during throughout the year. These are some other animals like Himalayan thar, which are similar to other Ethiopian or other African mountain ungulates. There are Himalayan mouse deer, brown bears, and Himalayan monal, which is the state bird of that particular area where I work. Sorry, there is yeah. So these are the predators like raptors, weasels, martens. These are the animals which eats on pikas. So if something happened to pikas, it actually can influence entire food chain, which can have negative impact on each of these animals. So when I go to field, I generally do trekking. So I have backpack and I go to field to collect data, which I require for my PhD and scientific observations. So I start working from around 2600 meters and I work till 4700 meters in altitude in mountain. Mainly I work in summer, but depending on my research questions, for example, if I need to know what they're doing during the winter or how snow thickness influence their numbers, I also have to do or conduct studies during the winter months when I go and measure snow and try to note down if pikas are active or inactive, if there is other animals I can see there or not. So once I go to my field, I have permanent plots, and then I use my binoculars to see those animals, their numbers, if it's a male or female. Sometimes you can say, most of the time you can't. And I note down which kind of habitat they live. Okay. Which kind of food they eat, as well as I put very small thermometers called data loggers. Those are like a small coin, so I put them inside their habitat as well as on the trees. I get those temperature data and then I compare them with my other observations. But apart from this field observation, I also collect genetic samples, because now we can address several climate change related questions using DNA. For that, I go to my field, I select certain plots, and I observe where pikas are, and I collect their fecal samples. So I know fecal samples, the moment you got to know about fecal samples, probably some of you are thinking like, oh no, again, not fecal sample. But then fecal sample probably give us wonderful information, because you can extract DNA, not only DNA of the animal it belongs to, but also DNA which it eats. For example, for pikas, it's plants. So I can actually know through the DNA samples which I can extract from these particular fecal matters that which plant it actually ate. And now when I analyze my data to know how vulnerable or how threatened they will be due to climate change, I can have multiple aspects of their ecology, so which I can trace back using not only their numbers as well as their food plants number, how it got changed, how that change can influence pikas number. And then I make DNAs, and then DNA helps us to make estimation about populations, movements, everything. And finally, all this information we put together to make different distribution map, which we provide to the government officials for the further conservation implications. For example, we did this mapping using all the information which I get from my field observation, and we found that around 40 to 52% areas which are suitable for this species now will be lost in 2070. Therefore, we can demarcate certain areas, observe pikas as model system to understand if climate change, if it's happening, which area where pikas is going to respond first, which area they might respond little later. But then Yeah, these are the areas which I highlighted might be affected. But apart from climate change in Himalaya, there are mountains in Kenya, and there are several wonderful species which are very endemic. That means they can be only found in Africa or in Kenya. For example, there are small mammals, shrew as well as rats. They only adapted to these high alpine regions. They are the animals which can respond very negatively towards climate change, because change in snow vegetation can also affect these animals' numbers significantly. So if you think which species you can study to understand climate change in Kenya, you just need to know what questions you are asking, why you think that my animal might be vulnerable or might be get threatened because of climate change, and you select several protocols are there. You select the animal based on those protocols. That okay, these are the characteristics which might make an animal vulnerable or threatened towards climate change. But apart from the research, you got to travel when you do research. So I was born and brought up in Calcutta, which is eastern part of India. But throughout my PhD as well as now, I got to travel in different parts of US, Europe, as well as China, Japan, for conferences, for fellowships. So not only you do research, which is field-based or sometimes can be lab-based, computer-based, but it also allow you to travel around the world, get a very different idea about how people live in those countries, as well as their culture.